The 13th tribe, the Khazar Empire and its heritage. The Persian state never recovered from the crushing defeat inflicted on it by Emperor Heraclius in 627. There was a revolution. The king was slain by his own son, who, in his turn, died a few months later. A child was elevated to the throne, and after 10 years of anarchy and chaos, the first Arab armies erupt on the scene, delivered the coup de grace to the Sassanid Empire. At about the same time, the West Turkish Confederation dissolved into its tribal components. A new triangle of powers replaced the previous one: the Islamic Caliphate, Christian Byzantium, and the newly emerged Khazar Kingdom of the North. It fell to the latter to bear the brunt of the Arab attack in its initial stages, and to protect the plains of Eastern Europe from the invaders. In the first 20 years of the Hijra, Muhammad's flight to Medina in 622, with which the Arab calendar starts, the Muslims had conquered Persia, Syria, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and surrounded the Byzantine heartland, the present-day Turkey, in a deadly semicircle which extended from the Mediterranean to the Caucasus and the southern shores of the Caspian. The Caucasus was a formidable natural obstacle, but no more forbidding than the Pyrenees, and it could be negotiated by the pass of Darel or bypassed through the defile of Darnband along the Caspian shore. This fortified defile, called by the Arabs Bab al-Abwab, the Gate of Gates, was a kind of historic turnstile through which the Khazars and other Morandering tribes had from time immemorial attacked the countries of the south and retreated again. Now, it was the turn of the Arabs. Between 642 and 652, they repeatedly broke through the Darband Gate and advanced deep into Khazaria, attempting to capture Balanjar, the nearest town, and thus secure a foothold on the European side of the Caucasus. They were beaten back on every occasion in this first phase of the Arab-Khazar War. The last time, in 652, in a great battle in which both sides used artillery, catapults, and ballistae. 4,000 Arabs were killed, including their commander, Abd al-Rahman ibn Rabban. The rest fled in disorder across the mountains. For the next 30 or 40 years, the Arabs did not attempt any further incursions into the Khazar stronghold. Their main attacks were now aimed at Byzantium. On several occasions, they laid siege to Constantinople by land and by sea. Had they been able to outflank the capital across the Caucasus and round the Black Sea, the fate of the Roman Empire would probably have been sealed. The Khazars, in the meantime, having subjugated the Bulgars and Magyars, completed their western expansion into the Ukraine and the Crimea. But these were no longer haphazard raids. to amass booty and prisoners. They were wars of conquest, incorporating the conquered people into an empire with a stable administration ruled by the mighty Kagan, who appointed his provincial governors to administer the levy taxes in the conquered territories. At the beginning of the 8th century, their state was sufficiently consolidated for the Khazars to take the offensive against the Arabs. From the distance of more than 1,000 years, the period of intermittent warfare that followed, the so-called Second Arab War, 722 to 37, looks like a series of tedious episodes on a local scale, following the same repetitive pattern. The Khazar cavalry, in their heavy armor, breaking through the pass of Darel, or the gate of Darband, into the Caliph's domains to the south, followed by Arab counter-thrusts through the same pass or the defile, towards the Volga and back again. Looking thus through the wrong end of the telescope, one is reminded of the old jingle about the noble Duke of York, who had 10,000 men. He marched them up to the top of the hill, and he marched them down again. In fact, the Arab sources, though they often exaggerate, speak of armies of 100,000, even of 300,000 men engaged on either side, probably outnumbering the armies which decided the fate of the Western world at the Battle of Tours about the same time. The death-defying fanaticism which characterized these wars is illustrated by episodes such as the suicide by fire of a whole Khazar town as an alternative to surrender. The poisoning of the water supply of Bab al-Abwab by an Arab general, or by the traditional extortion which would halt the route of a defeated Arab army and make it fight to the last man. To the garden, Muslims, not the fire. The joys of paradise being assured to every Muslim soldier killed in the Holy War. At one stage, during those 15 years of fighting, the Khazars overran Georgia and Armenia, inflicted a total defeat on the Arab army in the Battle of Ardabil in 730, and advanced as far as Mosul and Diyarbakir, more than halfway to Damascus, capital of the Caliphate. But a freshly raised Muslim army stemmed the tide, and the Khazars retreated homewards across the mountains. The next year, Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik, most famed Arab general of his time, who had formerly commanded the siege of Constantinople, took Balanjar and even got so far as Samandar, another large Khazar town further north. But once more, the invaders were unable to establish a permanent garrison, and once more they were forced to retreat across the Caucasus. The sigh of relief experienced in the Roman Empire assumed a tangible form through another dynastic alliance, when the heir to the throne was married to a Khazar princess whose son was to rule Byzantium as Leo the Khazar. The last Arab campaign was led by the future Caliph Marwan II and ended in a Pyrrhic victory. Marwan made an offer of alliance to the Khazar Khagan, then attacked by surprise through both passes. The Khazar army, unable to recover from the initial shock, retreated as far as the Volga. The Khagan was forced to ask for terms. Marwan, in accordance with the routine followed in other conquered countries, requested the Khagan's conversion to the true faith. The Khagan complied, but his conversion to Islam must have been an act of lip service, for no more is heard of the episode in the Arab or Byzantine sources. In contrast to the lasting effects of the establishment of Judaism as the state religion, which took place a few years later. Content with the results achieved, Marwan bid farewell to Khazaria and marched his army back to Transcaucasia without leaving any garrison, governor, or administrative apparatus behind. On the contrary, a short time later, he requested terms for another alliance with the Khazars against the rebellious tribes of the south. It had been a narrow escape, the reasons which prompted Marwan's apparent magnanimity are a matter of conjecture. As so much else in this bizarre chapter of history. Perhaps the Arabs realized that unlike the relatively civilized Persians, Armenians, or Georgians, these ferocious barbarians of the north could not be ruled by a Muslim puppet prince and a small garrison. Yet Marwan needed every man of his army to quell major rebellions in Syria and other parts of the Umayyad Caliphate, which was in the process of breaking up. Marwan himself was the chief commander in the civil wars that followed and became in 744 the last of the Umayyad Caliphates, only to be assassinated 6 years later when the caliphate passed to the Abbasid dynasty. Given this background, Marwan was simply not in a position to exhaust his resources by further wars with the Khazars. He had to content himself with teaching them a lesson which would deter them from further incursions across the Caucasus. Thus, the gigantic Muslim pincer movement across the Pyrenees in the west and across the Caucasus into Eastern Europe was halted at both ends about the same time, as Charles Martel's Franks saved Gaul and Western Europe. So the Khazars saved the eastern approaches to the Volga, the Danube, and the East Roman Empire itself. On this point, at least, the Soviet archaeologist and historian Artamanov and the American historian Dunlop are in full agreement. I have already quoted the latter to the effect that but for the Khazars, Byzantium, the bulwark of European civilization to the east, would have found itself outflanked by the Arabs, and that history might have taken a different course. Artamonov is of the same opinion. Khazaria was the first feudal state in Eastern Europe, which ranked with the Byzantine Empire and the Arab Caliphate. It was only due to the powerful Khazar attacks, diverting the tide of the Arab armies to the Caucasus, that the Byzantium withstood them. Lastly, the professor of Russian history in the University of Oxford, Dmitry Abolinsky, the main contribution of the Khazars to world history was their success in holding the line of the Caucasus against the northward onslaught of the Arabs. Marwan was not only the last Arab general to attack the Khazars, he was also the last caliph to pursue an expansion policy devoted, at least in theory, to the idea of making Islam triumph all over the world. With the Abbasid Caliphites, the wars of conquest ceased. The revived influence of the old Persian culture created a mellower climate, and eventually gave rise to the splendors of Baghdad under Harun al-Rashid.